Hello everyone. This video is the second of two concept videos that our team at QS Leap has developed to give you a clearer understanding of SAT reading. Now, as you can see from the slide, this video is going to be about a general strategy or a general methodology that you should ideally use when you attack SAT reading. To begin, let me first tell you a little bit about the new SAT and how it differs from the old one. First of all, the number of sections in the new SAT has gone down from 11 to 5. And while earlier we used to have an experimental section, we now don't, and instead we've got an optional essay section, which you may choose to avoid if you're not interested in writing an essay. Reading wise, as you can see, there used to be 3 sections, both on reading and writing actually, and now that has been brought down to 1 section each, wherein the reading section is perhaps the longest section you will see on the SAT, which is a 65-minute section comprising of 52 questions. If you've seen my earlier video, you'll have an understanding of the fact that of these 52 questions, you have to spend approximately 13 minutes on each passage. Alright? If you haven't seen that video, please go back and do so, because it will help you better understand what the different question types are and how you must approach the attacking of the passage based on those question types. Anyway, let's move into the general strategy. As you can see from the slide, there are 4 basic principles or 4 basic strategies rather that you must use when you approach reading on the SAT. First of all, when you read, it is important that you read actively. So the very first point is actively engage and note purpose, theme, structure and tone. Now what these 4 terms mean is something that I've made explicit in my previous video, but I will still tell you about them one more time as I go to my next slide. The next point is play devil's advocate. Now if you know what this phrase means, playing devil's advocate means to take a critical stance no matter what. So when you read the passage, constantly evaluate critically what has been written on it. Don't just accept it for face value. Alright? The third point is formulate your own answer before looking at the answer choices. Now this is something that a lot of people forget to do on test day, even though they may have practiced it earlier. But trust me, it is very important that you do it. When you answer a question on the SAT is definitely going to try and confuse you. And how it does that is by mentioning things in their options that may have been mentioned somewhere in the passage but are not obviously the correct answer, right? When you read your answer choices before formulating an answer for yourself, you might just get trapped by those answer choices, which is why it is important that you formulate your own answer. We'll talk about this, of course, as we go forward. The last point of the general strategy is you should learn to read paired passages as normal passages. Like I mentioned to you in my previous video, the new SAT has something called dual passage questions, wherein more than one passage will be given to you, ideally only 2 of course. And for both passages, you'll be asked to compare and contrast important crucial information that is mentioned in the passage. So when you read these paired passages, don't start trying to juggle both passages and trying to process information at the same time. Approach them one at a time and take them one at a time, just like you would do with a normal passage. And then when you read them, try to sort of take a subtle hint about any particular differences that you might find in content, attitude and tone. Okay? So let's look at each of these. I've already told you quite a bit about each of them, but I will talk about the first 2 particularly in some general detail, because you need to learn these well. Anyway, so the first point, which is actively engage and note purpose, theme, structure and tone. Let me talk about each of these: purpose, theme, structure and tone. First of all, purpose is the purpose with which the author has written the entire passage. Now if you guys remember in my previous video, I had explained to you how you can determine the purpose of a text. If you remember, I had told you there are three types of text that are ideally purpose oriented. Something called expository text, something called rhetoric text, and something called narrative text. Now, depending on the type of text, which is these three, the purpose is very different for each author, and accordingly the central theme will also be different. So the purpose and the theme are interconnected, as is the structure, which we will get to, of course. So when you start reading, the very first thing that you must start to do is engage with the passage and pick on these 4 points. Start figuring out the purpose, which is very easy to understand considering there are only 3 broad varieties. So if you notice that it's an expository variety, and then you will know that the purpose of the author is to give you facts about something. So when you know that, start looking for the theme. So what is that big major fact that the author is trying to tell you? That is the main idea or the main theme. That's the second thing. Next thing that you have to understand is the structure. When you look at the structure, the most important thing to remember is what the whole point of the entire passage is and how all the paragraphs contribute to that point. The moment you understand that, you will be able to understand the total functional structure of the entire passage. So every paragraph, and in fact every detail inside every paragraph, has a very functional significance in the sense that it is contributing in some significant way to the main point that the author has made. So always remember to first take out what that point is and then connect each paragraph with that point. Alright? And the last thing, which is the tone. So when you read, you will automatically understand from the way that the author has written his text, whether the tone is positive, negative, neutral, aggravated, perhaps nostalgic. It could be anything. So what that tone is also something that you must understand when you start reading. So when you read, don't just read for the sake of it. Don't just absorb the contents of it. Also absorb these 4 things. Alright? Other than that, some important points to note here is when you get oriented, you have to read the first sentence carefully. So when you read the first sentence, that is where you start understanding the purpose and the theme, and you start getting towards the structure. Of course, the tone also comes there, but the purpose and the theme are the most important. Alright? Which is the third point over here. Also, you must be able to read the entire paragraph. Sometimes what we do is we read a couple of lines and then we immediately make an idea about what the paragraph might be about. No, don't do this. Make sure that you go through the entire paragraph and then reach your conclusion about what the purpose of the paragraph might have been. Alright? I already told you about the focus on the purpose and the central idea. Make sure that you don't fixate too much over the details just yet. Remember that in every passage there will be something called the big picture and something called the little picture. The big picture is something that largely contributes to the whole, and the little picture are those little things that support the whole. So when you're doing, the meaning of this point is that when you're putting your focus on your reading, make sure that the focus is on the purpose and the central idea because they contribute to the big picture. Once you understand the big picture, it should not be hard for you to go back later and find where those little things were located when you read them. All you need to do is notice where they are positioned and why they have been positioned the way they have been positioned. Alright? Last point is find a simple story to tell a friend. Now, this is a common point that is mentioned in a lot of test prep books. The simple story is nothing but the shortest conclusion, the shortest summary that you can make of the passage. Of course, this is not an easy thing to do. So often when you read the passage, try to feign interest in it as though you will have to tell the story to someone later on. So imagine that you have a friend who really likes the topic that you're reading about. So imagine that you'll have to tell this friend about this topic. So make sure that you summarize the entire passage in a way that you can narrate the story to this friend later on. Alright? So this was the point about actively engaging. So when you engage with the passage, then you make sure that you focus on the purpose and the central idea, which is the most important thing. Make sure that you skim over the details but absolutely remember where they were located, and make sure that you read every paragraph till the very end and not just skim over it in a way that you not understand the function of the paragraph. Alright? And of course, remember to summarize the entire passage in a way that you can narrate as though you want to narrate it to a friend later on. Okay? Alright, the next strategy is play devil's advocate. Now this is an important strategy because this is actually the type of thing that focuses on your logical reasoning skills. Now remember, when you are asked to read something, you're not just asked to take in the information that is given to you. You're also asked to critically analyze the information that is presented to you. Which is why when you're doing this, when you're reading a passage, then make sure that you play devil's advocate. What does that mean? That means take on a critical stance. Alright? If you're reading a passage that is expository in nature, then ask yourself questions like, how could the descriptions or explanations in the passage be clearer or more effective? That is, how could the author make this a better write-up? Alright? How could he make it more informative? Or ask questions like, is the passage logically and effectively organized? Because if the logic does not come out clearly, then obviously the information or the main guiding question that the author was trying to answer will not come out, right? So ask questions like that. If it is a rhetorical prose, then ask questions like, did the author address alternate points of view on the subject? Remember, in the rhetorical one, the author is largely putting forward an opinion in the form of a thesis. So when he's putting that forward, he has to evaluate all the pluses and the minuses, because he is effectively trying to convince you of his own thesis. Correct? So, question there whether the author addressed alternate points of view on the subject, whether the kind of evidence that he presented was worth evaluating. Could it be weakened by any other point of view? Or could it be strengthened by any means? Right? So ask yourself these questions. Ask the passage these questions. For narrative proses, ask questions like, is the conflict or struggle indicated clearly? Now, if you remember, narrative is where there is a protagonist and then the protagonist's story unfolds. Everything that the protagonist goes through, whether it's a conflict, whether it's a struggle, is entailed, is listed down in a narrative piece. So that's where you ask yourself questions like, is the conflict indicated clearly? Whatever happens to the protagonist, is it even shown clearly or is it left ambiguous? Are the characterizations effective? Characterizations essentially are the different ways in which the protagonist has been shown and different ways in which other supporting characters in the story have been shown. So have those characterizations been shown effectively is another question that you must ask yourself. Alright? Formulate your own answer before looking at the answer choices. Now this is something that I already discussed with you. Some test takers, what they do is, the moment that they see the question, they immediately start going through the multiple choice options because they want to immediately start eliminating the incorrect answers. This is not the right strategy, of course, because when you start doing this, you fall for the traps. Because what happens is, a lot of the wrong answer choices include catchphrases or include words that remind you of the content of the passage. And for readers who are careless, it's very easy to fall for the trap. Alright? So this is where you need to not do this, not go through the answer choices, and even before you read them, start formulating an answer of your own based on the very question that you read. That is exactly what the SAT is trying to test, how well you read the passage to even be able to come up with your own answer. And once you've formulated your own answer, you can always match that with the options, and perhaps you will see some differences in wordings or a different form of phrasing it, but you will still find the best approximation. Because remember that on the SAT, there's always one correct answer. If you find yourself encountering multiple correct answers, then that means you have made a mistake somewhere. Either you've missed a very crucial clue or you have misinterpreted something. So make sure that does not happen. which is why when you read the question, it is very important that you come up with the answer on your own first, because whatever answer you come up with on your own will obviously be singular. So when you start matching it, of course, if nothing matches with your own answer, you've obviously not done a good job. But then again, at least you will not get confused by the options, right? And of course, the last strategy for this video today is when you read paired passages, read them as normal passages. See, when you come across paired passages, that is dual passages, you'll basically find two passages on a similar common topic. And that is where you might be asked to answer questions like, what is the common topic? How those two passages differ in attitude or tone? How the two passages differ in emphasis? Whether there are any important points of disagreement. So essentially, when you're comparing two passages, you're looking at what kind of emphasis they had. Maybe they'll both be about the same topic, but one may emphasize on a positive aspect of the topic, while the other may emphasize on the negative aspect of it. So whatever that difference, you have to make a mental note of it as you read it. But make sure you don't get carried away by it too much, of course, because if you start doing that, you're essentially trying to juggle two passages, which is not advised. You must attempt each passage as though it is one passage in itself. That is how you will actually get the essence of it. And once you get the essence of it, it will actually be easier for you to compare both passages based on the main points that you yourself have extracted from it. Alright? So read paired passages just as you would read normal SAT reading passages, but with particular attention to important differences in content, attitude, and tone. Alright, so that's about it for this video. If you have any queries in your mind regarding the general strategy or any more strategies that you may have come across in other books or through other material, please feel free to comment on this video and we will get back to you. Additionally, we'll be starting live classes soon, where all these strategies will essentially come to live because we'll be showing you these strategies on actual questions, on actual SAT questions, and that is where you'll actually see the application of these strategies. For now, please make sure that you use these strategies on the questions that you attempt on QS Leap. So go out there, practice those questions, and make use of these strategies right away before you forget them. Thank you so much for listening to the video. I'll be back in another video which will be about writing on the SAT. Until then, goodbye.